Welcome to Policy on Demand's Week in Review. I'm Pat Brown.
What would you tell clients are your takeaways from this week?
So my key takeaways from this week is that companies have to look in a lot of different directions at once, and it's proving to be a real challenge, and that's not surprising. Of course, we know that the comment period ended this week for the Treasury Department's proposed foreign tax credit regulations, and we know Treasury received a number of comments on that. So companies are expected to and are continuing to engage on the regulatory process. At the same time, we continue to look for additional guidance from the OECD with respect to both Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. In particular, some really key guidance, the so-called implementation guidance with respect to Pillar 2, is expected to come out in the coming weeks. And we're hearing rumors about some things that may be included in that guidance, but nothing firm, of course, but something that companies are having to pay attention to. And of course, with the new Congress back in session, now the question becomes, how is the legislative agenda going to shape up over the course of the next year? And so I think across all three of those fronts, regulatory, international guidance, as well as the Congress, there's a lot of focus and attention required by companies in a lot of different directions.
Which question related to policy did you get asked the most, and how did you respond?
So I've seen a little bit of an evolution on the part of companies with respect to Pillar 2, and those are the policy questions I'm fielding the most. Early in January, the questions were, is this really happening? Now the questions, I think, are tinged with a bit more frustration. It's not, is this really happening, but how can it be that this is really happening when there are still so many questions, some really fundamental questions that we don't have the answers to? For example, what is the status of GILTI? How will GILTI get allocated out from the single amount that gets paid by a company to the US Treasury Department amongst the group of foreign affiliates? And what then becomes the so-called stacking order or ordering rule when it comes to treating GILTI as a tax that has to get taken into account for purposes of applying Pillar 2. We also have a lot of questions from companies about how do I establish my opening balance sheet for Pillar 2? Obviously a tax that is built off of financial accounting concepts, so you have to have an opening balance sheet, but there are a lot of fundamental questions about how that gets done. And so again, over the course of the last several weeks, really an evolution from this sense of, is this really happening, to more of, well, if this is really happening, how can we move forward when there's still so many things we don't know the answer to?
Where should companies focus their attention in the coming week?
So I would say in the coming week, and indeed in the next couple of weeks, pay attention to what's happening on Capitol Hill. We've got a new chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. We've got some new participants on the Senate Finance Committee. And so one of the questions that should start to take shape over the course of the next couple of weeks is, how will the new chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Chairman Smith, how will Chairman Wyden over on the Senate Finance Committee start to set out what they expect to be their agenda for this coming year? Now, we're not expecting a great deal of legislative activity. We've got divided government. We know that, but that doesn't mean Congress is going to be idle. So I think one of the things that will be really interesting to watch over the course of the next couple of weeks is, how will the chairman look to establish their agenda for the coming year? And I do think that will start to take shape in the relatively near future.